Silverstream placed a claw on Skystar's arm as she began to bounce with excitement. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Skystar smiled before her beak parted and she dropped the tiny mouse inside. It immediately began to squirm as Skystar tilted her head, feeling its tiny body easily slip into her throat as she gave it a quick swallow, sending it shooting down her neck. "I've missed the taste of mice." The others began to scream and ran in multiple directions. The two hippogriffs easily caught another mouse each, tossing them into their maws and swirling them around before swallowing them whole. The rest of the mice had scattered, trying to hide under the desks and chairs to stay out of reach of the ravenous creatures. Ocellus ran across the floor, running beneath a nearby desk, but something snagged on her tail, causing her to fall flat on her chest. She rolled over to see Silverstream's pink claw, pinching her tail as it slowly dragged her along her back towards her. "Let her go." Smolder charged towards Silverstream's claw, head-butting it as hard as she could. It didn't do much except give her a pounding headache as she fell back onto her own back. With her other claw, Silverstream grabbed Smolder's tail, sitting upright as she lifted both mice up in front of her. "Ah, this one tried to save the other. But we have to get rid of you, no exceptions." As Silverstream lifted Ocellus to her beak, Smolder pulled herself up her own tail, sinking her large teeth into Silverstream's claw. "Ouch!" she screamed, dropping Smolder to the ground. Smolder immediately rolled over and began running away. "You wait here!" Silverstream shouted at Ocellus as she placed her on the ground and shuffled over her, sitting down on her to keep her pinned. Ocellus, stuck on her back with the immense weight of the hippogriff on top of her, found something more to panic about as between the fur right in her face, she could feel a growing heat, blasting down on her. She could see snippets of flesh behind the fur and she was much closer than she wanted to be to such a thing. "Come here." Silverstream brought her claw down, but Smolder was able to dodge it, leaping between the claws and continued running. Now out of reach, Silverstream leaned forward more, leaning too much as she fell onto her belly, her outstretched arm managing to come down and grab Smolder. "Gotcha!" Silverstream had been so preoccupied catching her prey, she only now noticed the squirms of her previous catch below. Still holding Smolder tightly so only her head could move in her grasp, Silverstream sat back up and looked down, finding the rear of the turquoise mouse, legs kicking as her upper half was lodged into her sex. Silverstream blushed, turning to see Skystar preoccupied with catching other mice by the tail with her beak, slowly slurping them up as they struggled to get away. She reached down with her free claw, ready to grab on of the kicking legs, but instead the legs kicked at her, unintentionally forcing its way deeper inside of her. Ocellus was sweating from the heat, although it could have been the fluids of her own captor that dripped down her face as she tried to push herself back out. Her legs flailed wildly, trying to find something to hook onto, but instead, something solid came up from below, accidentally causing her to kick off from it and push herself deeper. In even more of a panic, she tried to wrap her legs around whatever it was she kicked, but instead she felt something brush between her legs before a sharp poke at her rear. The poke began to dig in deeper as she started to slide along the steadily slickening tunnel, deeper and deeper. The sensation of the mouse inside was getting Silverstream more excited as she pushed a single claw inside, finding the mouse and pushing it deeper inside. When she withdrew her claw, followed by a thin strand of fluid that broke quickly, all that remained was the tail, still swinging side to side. She brought her thighs together, squeezing her prey a bit before parting them again, finding nothing left to be seen. Her attention was brought back to Smolder, who had managed to see Ocellus being pushed inside. When she noticed Silverstream had turned her attention to her, she tried to bite her claw again, but couldn't tilt her head enough in the tight grip. Without saying a word, Silverstream tossed the orange mouse into her beak, snapping shut on its tail before slurping it up like a strand of spaghetti. She tilted her head back and swallowed, but her meal refused to budge. Her tongue began to bash as the mouse, trying to force it down her throat, but the mouse managed to pin her tongue down and stand up on it. Bracing her paws on the roof of Silverstream's beak, Smolder pushed up with her paws and kicked down with her legs, forcing the beak to part. Silverstream was taken aback as the mouse pried her beak open. She hadn't expected the mouse to be so tough, but she hadn't really been trying. Finding it more of a nuisance than she wanted to deal with, she snapped her beak shut on the mouse, tossing it to the side of her beak and crunching down on it between her teeth. She preferred a squirming meal as it tickled her belly, but this one just had to force her into chewing it to pieces. Swallowing the mush, her attention was brought back to between her legs. Although it still squirmed inside her, she rubbed a claw along her fur just above her sex, deciding to leave it in there for fun. Skystar on the other side of the class tossed a couple more mice into her beak, opening it a bit and curling her tongue around them as she forced them back into her throat. Below her, a white mouse ran towards her. She leaned down, snapping her beak at it, but the mouse pulled ahead, narrowly avoiding her tail being caught by the hippogriff. "Where are you going?" Skystar began to back up for another go at that mouse when she noticed a yellow one, running up behind the white one. Her head dove down for the meal, but her legs were still backing up. Before she knew what was going on, she fell back, tripping over herself. "Rarity, wait for me." Rarity looked back as Fluttershy was in pursuit behind her. As she looked back, she also noticed Skystar above, toppling over. The door was still a little crack opened. If she could get past Skystar before she fell, she'd be able to escape the classroom. Unfortunately, she didn't have time to wait for Fluttershy and just kept running. She misjudged the size of Skystar's body though, as her rump came down with extreme force on top of her. Rarity barely had time to lift her paws as the titanic hippogriff crashed down on her. Fluttershy's sight of Rarity disappeared in an instant as a wall of yellow fur now covered her vision. She stopped her running, but the momentum she had begun had carried her form across the floorboards as she slid, turning slightly until her back slammed into Skystar. Skystar fell backwards, slamming her rear onto the ground. It hurt for a moment, but a sudden pat down below grabbed her attention. She looked down to see the yellow mouse, backed up right between her legs. As she reached down towards it, the mouse got up on its hind legs, trying to back up more. What it didn't realize was it was now rubbing against a more sensitive area behind the fur. Skystar stopped, her claw just hovering in front of the mouse. She looked back at Silverstream, who had her head stuck under a desk, her arm trapped between the chair but managing to catch a couple of mice by trapping their tails under her hoof. Seeing as she wasn't likely to be seen, Skystar brought her claw down, pushing it into the yellow mouse's belly and forcing it inside her. She shivered under the squirming sensation, forcing it inside her until its tail was all that could be seen. She clenched a little, feeling it tighten up due to the pressure. It excited her. But where was the white one? She got up onto all four, expecting to see the crushed remains on the ground, but there wasn't anything, not even a stain. Rarity though was holding her paws across her nose. Her head and in fact, entire body was lodged deep into Skystar's colon. Although a little roomy for her, it still wasn't the place she'd ever thought she'd find herself, in any creature. She pushed back against the slimy intestines, trying to force her rear back out the tightened muscle. She could feel her tail swinging wildly outside in the cool air, but as much as she pushed back, the ring just stayed sealed. In fact, it tightened on her tail a bit. Her prison began to tilt as the dark side of the tunnel that led deeper into Skystar's rectum began to drop down below her. Rarity tried to hold on, but the walls were still so slimy, her paws just slipped. She quickly lost all grip as her body fell, yanked back by the pull of her tail. Skystar's anus had tightened on Rarity's tail, holding her above the depths, but Rarity knew it wouldn't last long. She tried to scratch at the ring with her back legs, keep the pressure on, but she found her legs didn't reach far enough. She tried to flick her tail tip, but she was still learning to control a tail in such a way. It quickly didn't mean much as the mussel loosened its grip and Rarity's tail slipped